This podcast is brought to you by Blackaby Ministries International. To find out more, visit blackaby.org.
Well, welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Richard Blackaby Leadership Podcast. My name is Sam. I'm your host, and we are helping take your leadership to the next level. And to help us do that, we've got Richard.
Good to be with you again, Sam.
They're looking slimmer every day, Richard.
Well, thanks. I'm working at it.
Good. Well, it's been a cold spring, or a slow spring this year.
Mm-hmm.
I think I was wearing a jacket just a few weeks ago, and here we are into May, which is great for the weather, not as great for my plants.
Yeah.
And speaking of plants, we today are look at a blog post that you wrote.
Yeah.
About leadership lessons from the garden, and I love this because I like to garden and leadership, and I'm anxiously awaiting the insights in gardening that you're going to, in leadership that you'll.
Well, I do this with fear and trepidation because you are a much better gardener. You come from a family of gardeners. Your parents have a really impressive garden in their yard now, and you're even raising chickens now. So
I know that's sort of uncharted territory for us, but very excited to.
Yeah, and you even have my daughter talking about wanting to get a goat. I never ever could have dreamed. That is beyond anything I would have ever imagined. But I would quickly just need to have full disclosure that I am not a great gardener. I don't really have a good plot of yard like even you do.
You've got a lot of trees.
I've got a lot of oak trees in my yard, and I love that, but it creates a lot of shade and not a lot of space for open plants. And so I've got an above ground little garden box, and now I've got a little water tower.
Is that like a hydroponic?
Yeah, and
Okay.
but my mother willed to me, I guess you could say, this year, and I've planted some.
And your mother's doing great.
Yeah,
she's
she's
just
fine.
was tired of the garden.
She wants me just to bring her the vegetables when they're done, but. And I plant a bunch of fruit trees along a fence line. I'm a big. I love blackberries and blueberries and raspberries, so that's pretty well. And I've got a compost barrel. I mean, it's very, very minimal what I've got, but I would say that when COVID hit, and I've tried this for several years now. I've grown things, and typically in April or so, March around here in Georgia, I'll start to go pick up some more berry. Usually about half or more of my berry plants don't survive winter, and so I run to Lowe's and get some more and plant them, and I'll water them faithfully for a day or two, and then I'll hit another busy spring travel schedule and be going like crazy, and come back and discover to my horror that half my blueberry bushes are all dried up and withered, and all kinds of things have happened. And I'll get discouraged. In fact, last year I was traveling so much in the springtime, I just couldn't keep up with. A lot of times I'd be getting home one evening and heading out the next morning, and just didn't have time to go out and check on things. And it was just a veritable sort of wasteland by halfway through the summer. I just almost just gave up, and so when COVID hit, and I realized suddenly I had 24 trips canceled, I thought I can actually be around here. I can check on
see
stuff.
A harvest before your next trip.
Yeah, so I decided, you know what, I'm going to just really take one more run at this, and so I went out to try to sort things out. I like to joke that my garden looked sort of like the end of a Jurassic Park movie. It was just like just destruction everywhere, things, debris and dead things, and it was a disaster. But I would just say this as a Type A driven, very hard driving kind of guy. I've got this little garden box, just pretty well right outside my office door. And it is so therapeutic to go out in the mornings. Usually the first thing, once I get down in my office, I go out and I water all my little pots and vegetables and things I've got, and check my berries. And it's very I tell you what, it's a great hobby if you are someone that needs to know how to relax.
Yeah.
And to have patience.
I always go out to the garden in the evenings. Usually when I get home from work, it's just nice to decompress, and you're out there picking weeds and just tending everything. It's just really, there is something very, and I think there's a reason that so many people do some type of gardening.
And my wife and I, we're trying to eat much, more organic and a lot of vegetables, and even just putting herbs and things on your food, just kind of spicing things up.
Well, you should certainly, if you haven't already, get some mint. Some mint plants.
Yeah,
those are hard to destroy, and they live through the winter, and so.
Yeah, well, I ordered some mint seeds, and it's taken a month to get them, just because of, I don't know why. It's because of all the shipping issues right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've ordered some of those, and so I would just highly recommend try to grow something. It will actually speak very much into your leadership. And I wanted, now leadership is something I do know. I'm pretty ignorant about gardening, but I do know a lot more about leadership. But what's interesting is when you start gardening, you learn a lot, or you're reminded a lot about leadership. And so in this blog I wrote, and we'll post that in the show notes, a link to that if you may be someone that subscribes to the blogs. I try to put out a leadership blog about once a week or so, and this is be kind of drawn from this today. But there's 6 things that I just mentioned that I've learned. There's more than 6 lessons, obviously, but here's 6 things that I've learned. One is growing things is fun. It just is fun when you plant a little seed in the dirt. And then you come back and you see this little green protrusion just barely breaking through the dirt, and then you watch it, and you're weeding it, and I'll move if it seems like it's kind of covered up by little debris or things in the ground. I'll kind of clear some space, and I'll water it and watch it. It starts to get growing, and then you watch to see if any fruit or vegetable is going to develop, and then one day, ultimately, you put it in a salad, and you actually eat something that didn't exist, and you grew it, and now it's making you healthy, and it's delightful.
Yeah.
That watching it just day by day. I've got some blackberries that are turning from red to black, and I stick those in my granola in the morning. It's awesome. But what I've realized is that leaders love to grow things too, and everywhere I've ever gone, at least my calling has always been to go to a place that was broken down, a church that had been in decline for years. Now it's got down to a handful, and to treat that church kind of like a garden, where you want to start growing it back. You want to make it healthy again. You want to make it fruitful again. And I remember just coming to this little church and starting a new adult Sunday school class. Just try to start something new. See if it will take off. See if people will be attracted to it. And then to watch this class grow. And then to bring in a co-teacher to help me teach. And then send that co-teacher off and start a new class with them. And you begin to see this multiplying, and more people coming to Bible study each week because you're tending to that garden and investing in people. And I think one of the great joys of leadership is, especially when you have some homegrown talent, people that maybe were just at the bottom rung in your organization, or is just some young person or new believer who came to your church, and you invest in them and disciple them and mentor them, and now they're in a role of leadership. Maybe they're a deacon or elder in your church, and maybe they're a Sunday school teacher, and you remember when they were not even a believer, and you remember when they were a little scruffy coming to church. You weren't sure what would become of them, but you grew them, and now they're this mature, fruitful, joyful believer serving the Lord. And I'll tell you what, it's like gardening. There's many of the principles are the same, and there's so many impediments that could destroy this new thing. It could discourage this person. It could upset the work you're doing in the church or in your company. But I'll tell you, when you see things grow, it's very gratifying. And I think perhaps that's why right now, we've mentioned this statistic often, but around 70% of churches are not growing today in America.
Yeah.
And to me, that would just suggest that there's a lot of very discouraged pastors, because I think it's just natural. In nature, it's natural for things to grow. And when things aren't growing, that's unnatural. And I think that there's a joy. It's hard to have the same kind of joy when things are stagnant or declining as when things are growing. And so leaders have to become experts in helping things to grow. And so whatever God has entrusted to you, and when I used to lead a seminary, we would be training all these students to become pastors one day. And I remember at our church, we had a number of these students who'd attend the church. And so they would try to give them some experience. And they would say, okay, why don't you just teach this Sunday school class with 10 adults in it? And eventually they had grown that class down to about 3 adults. And you would say, well, you know what? If you can't grow a Sunday school class with believers and that want to come to Bible study, how are you ever going to grow a church? You've got to learn how to grow little things, and then God can entrust you with more. And so that's why I say to folks, you may want to one day be the CEO of a major company. Well, just look around and find something that you can grow right now.
Yeah.
If it's just starting a home Bible study in your home, and start it from nothing and have 24 people coming to your home every Tuesday night, that's great. You've grown something. But if you can't grow, if you have no track record of growing anything in your life, then you shouldn't have that much expectation that you can be made the boss of something and then suddenly things will just start growing.
Yeah.
So a second thing is just, I just call it tend the soil. That is, and here in Georgia, the soil is pretty harsh. A lot of red soil, hard soil, clay. And so, you try to dig into the ground and it's hard digging, and you can plant a seed in this red soil and you wonder, is anything going to take root here or not? And so I think that's why I know you guys compost as well. And I've been a lot more active this year composting, just trying to create nutritious soil. And at a certain point, I'll dig into that compost barrel and I'll haul some shovelfuls of rich soil and put it in my berry plants and things, just trying to give them some nutrients there to eat on. And I find that in leadership, it's the same way. Sometimes we're not sensitive to the soil that we're putting people into. We want them to grow. We want them to be effective, but we put them into a pretty harsh environment. And I remember years ago, I had hired someone to take over a new task. And I was giving this person his first leadership role. He'd never been in management before. And he really wanted to do a good job. But he'd never done it before, so he didn't really know how. And so his thought was, I got to get organized. His view of leaders was they were in the office and they were planning and calendaring and budgeting and so on. But this guy had some immediate tasks that needed to be done. And these were tasks that everybody could notice weren't being done. And I could already hear some grumbling because some of the things this guy needed to take care of were affecting everybody else. Now, he intended to get to those things, but he just felt like even if he had to take a week to do planning, that then he could begin taking care of the day-to-day. And at a certain point, I had to pull the guy aside and say, and just sort of show him all the work that was piling up, and people were literally tripping over things that he needed to take care of. And I thought, you know what, this guy could get everybody against him and critical of him right off the bat. And before he knows it, he's already failed. It's like trying to grow a plant in rock hard red clay. And so I had to kind of soften the soil. I had to help him take root. And I had to talk to some of the other people dealing with him to say, listen, this guy, it's his first management job. Give him some slack. He's learning. He's growing. He wants to do a good job, and try to make it a bit easier on him. But a lot of times we just drop people in. Anyone who volunteers, hey, just take this class, do this job. Well, we don't have much money right now, so we've just given you an assignment, but you don't have any budget. Don't spend any money right now. Or maybe we've had problem in your department for years, but we'll just throw another warm body at it. but we haven't addressed the soil, the environment in any way. We haven't made it any easier. And so I would say if you want to see things flourish and grow, you can't just toss seeds everywhere. You got to say, but how can I make the environment conducive to growth? And that may mean I've got to be putting new soil out there. I've got to be fertilizing. But if I want things to grow, it doesn't just automatically happen. And the great gardeners I know, whether you're growing a vineyard, you're growing vegetables, they care about the soil. They care about the acidity. Yeah. They may stick in different chemicals and things just to help enrich the soil, make it more hospitable to plants. But unwise leaders, they don't think of those things. It's just like, hey, we'll just get somebody else if this person doesn't work out. And then you wonder why nobody seems to be working out. Well, you haven't addressed the soil.
Yeah.
And a third one that kind of goes with that is just check the climate. When you start trying to grow things, at least for me, I wanted to have cobblers. so it's like, well, let's get blackberries, raspberries, blueberries, and here come the cobblers. I might as well go get my ice cream ready and
go churn some vanilla ice cream.
You sort of just start ordering seeds, whatever. But and you'll see these. Of course, if you go online and you look at different seeds, they show you these luscious blackberry bushes, these huge blackberries and so on. Oh, that's what I want to grow that. And I want to grow right now. My Waterloo is strawberries. I've tried a couple times to get strawberries.
Yeah, those are finicky.
Oh boy, it's become the strawberry killing fields. And but you think, well, I want to grow this, I want to grow that, but Georgia, in some ways, the climate is great for growing because it's warmer longer, but it gets really hot in the summertime. Yeah. And there's just certain climates that you can't just grow anything in any climate.
You got to just pay attention to that colorful little map with all the zones on the back.
And what zone are we anyway? Because I haven't even checked that out yet.
But that's a good question. You put me on. It's probably zone 2.
But yes, I just learned that this year, I think, was that there are different climate zones across North America.
Yeah.
And so if you're going to buy seeds, you got to buy seeds that work in that climate zone. Yeah. And so a classic example in the church is people that would read about what Rick Warren did in Southern California to grow a church.
Yeah.
He was trying to grow a church that would reach Southern Californians. That's certainly a unique culture down there, a lifestyle. And so someone in Boston reads about how he's growing a church in Southern California and says, well, we'll do that. Well, let's go to his conference and see what he did there, and then we'll do that in Boston.
Yeah.
Well, it's a different culture. Now, that doesn't mean that the gospel changes. It doesn't mean that the biblical truths change. But methodology, approach to people is very different. In years past, if you lived, I remember one time a pastor coming in from Florida to Canada, talking about going to Tuesday night visitation, and he actually made the statement to us pastors: if you're not visiting out in the community on Tuesday nights, you're just sinning against God. Well, I said, let me ask you something. Have you ever headed out on a Tuesday night when it was 40 degrees below zero with a wind chill howling about you that made it much colder than that? Have you ever tried to knock on a Canadian's door when it's 40 below zero? They hear their doorbell ring and they go and look out their door, and here's a guy all bundled up with a heavy jacket on. His face is covered with a scarf, and all you can see is just the mist of his breath in the air. And if you open the door, this howling 40 below wind and cold starts sweeping into the house, but you don't know this stranger. You don't want to invite him into your house. I said, in Florida, those people are sitting out on the veranda in the front of their house. You just walk down the sidewalk and say, hey, how you doing? And
hey,
come on over. And I said, but it's a different culture. So when you're looking at things to implement into your organization, that's great that they do this in Tokyo. In companies there, but they have a different culture there too. Sometimes there's a different kind of economy And so there's different kind of work ethic, the way that people approach work, or even just timeliness. And so, yeah, you can't just wholesale you got to know your climate zone.
Yeah.
And say, now that doesn't mean that you can't necessarily grow strawberries in Georgia, but you may need a certain kind of strawberry. And you might need to take some precautions in the way you water, you fertilize, or when you put them out, when you expect to harvest. It doesn't mean you can't still do some of the same kinds of things, but you're going to have to adapt to the climate that you're trying to lead in and the kind of people that you're working with. And that has been a huge one. You can't just cut and paste when it comes to leadership. You've got to know the climate that you're trying to lead in. And if you're leading in Africa, it may be very different than leading in North America or South America, and even within regions in the U.S. itself. And so wise leaders, they before they try to grow things, they ask themselves, what climate am I working with? What kind of culture am I leading in? And culture certainly can change with the generations and so on as well, and immigration and other things. And so know your climate well before you try to start leading.
Well, let's take a quick break here, and when we come back, we will wrap this up. Hey, it's Sam here, and I don't know about you, but life has changed significantly in the last few weeks. Not going to work like we normally do, not being able to see friends and family like we used to. And I know I'm not alone in this, and many of you have also experienced massive changes in your daily life. And because of that, here at Blackaby Ministries, we started doing a Facebook Live devotional with Richard. And we do this every Tuesday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. And you can ask your questions live. You can interact with our community. It's just a way to check in with everyone and hopefully be encouraged in the middle of the week. We'd love to see you there, and we're probably going to do this until life goes back to something that resembles normal. Okay, now back to the show. Well, Richard, before the break, we saw that the importance of a good soil and a good climate, or knowing your climate. I wouldn't say there's good and bad climates, but there's just, you have to work around. It's an obstacle. And you have to work with your climate and not against it.
Yeah.
And before we finish up here, what other great leadership truths have you harvested from your time gardening?
Well, I'll tell you, a big one that has just dominated a lot of my gardening has been watch for intruders. Last year, when I was really busy, I was looking out on my fence line where all my berries are, and I saw a lot of greenery, a lot of foliage. I was really excited. I thought, wow, those plants are really taking off. They're growing up onto the fence and filling out. And but I was so busy that for a couple of weeks, I really didn't have time to even go out there. I just to take a close look. I finally went out there, and I realized those are not blackberry vines. Those are not raspberry vines. It's actually some rogue, lethal vine that had actually crept into my yard and was literally just strangling out my plant, just wrapping itself around my raspberry and blackberry bushes, and it had thorns on it. I still don't know what the name is, but I trying to pull that out, yank it out. It's uprooting plants. It's choked out some of my plants. I finally, foolishly, put some Roundup on some of the roots to try to get right to the root of the problem. Sucker. And of course, it killed off a bunch of my berry plants, and it was a disaster.
Roundup doesn't care what's growing; it's going to kill it. And
I'll tell you what, it was. I find it was just scorched earth policy. And I still this year that vine
still isn't growing.
It's still back, and I'll tell you, it's just like I'm fighting a constant warfare against this thing. And I realize now that I'm home more, I'm vigilantly watching to see if that vine starts to try to creep back in. But and then I've got a bunch of squirrel issues that drive me crazy. Last year, I saw them walking off with full-size tomatoes and eating into my peppers. And
well, the menacing thing about squirrels and birds and stuff is they won't eat the whole thing. They'll just taste it.
Yeah, that is annoying.
Tomato with just a little chunk gnawed out of it.
Yeah, now what do you do with that? And so
put it on the compost.
That just drives me crazy. And so what I've realized is if you're not going to be vigilantly watching all the time, there's no point even growing things, because there's always something coming. And what I realized is that when you're leading an organization, there are always those rogue intruders that are going to come in, who don't fit your culture, who are just negative. They've got their own agenda. It often happens in the church. If you're a smaller church and a couple starts visiting and they look like they're well-dressed and they have good jobs and they've been in church for years, and you think, oh, that's great, we need another solid couple. They seem to be real upbeat and positive. But then you start, just hearing things. Well, the last church they were in, there was a lot of problems there. And if you talk to them about it, they'll say, well, it was the pastor's fault, and it was there were just issues there. And then but you realize the church before that they were in, there were problems. And then you begin to notice that they tend to be just talking to some of the malcontents in the church and some of the negative people. And if you're not careful, these kinds of people, they'll just make the rounds. And I've seen it all my life. These people that just they're like some kind of freeloader, in the sense that they can't start anything of their own. They have to just live off of what others have started. And I've known people that wanted to be a pastor, but they'd failed as a pastor themselves. But so they'll just kind of linger around in a church and just criticize and cause grief to the pastor of that church. And if you neglect that, they'll dig in roots, they'll get entangled with other members, and by the time you finally address these troublemakers, you lose a dozen church members with them, because they've been going out for lunch and they've been criticizing you behind your back.
It's that vine that snakes around all of your your good
and so
plants.
I've just kind of learned, especially when you're introducing an outside person into your culture of your organization, your church, your company, keep an eye on those people. You may have hired the person, but now watch them carefully, the way that they conduct themselves when you're in a team meeting. Are they negative? Are they positive? Are they getting along well with the other staff? Are they rubbing people the wrong way? I've had some real solid, trustworthy folks that started coming to me with some concerns about things they were hearing or seeing about this new hire. And I've learned to take that very seriously, because it can cause huge disaster when you have to start uprooting and letting people go, perhaps, that you had no idea. And oftentimes, if you check people's track record, though, these kind of people, they usually have one.
Well, in gardening, it's so easy to just pluck out you see these little weeds growing up, and those are easy. You just go in, you just, hardly have to touch them, and you get rid of them. But you let it go for a week. Yeah. You let it go for 2 weeks, and now you've got a problem. And I think that I think also applies even to attitudes. I would see those intrusions as attitudes as well. Because, at first, hey, a remark here and there, no big deal. But you just let that grow and grow and grow, and now it's disturbing the whole garden, and you can't. You end up sacrificing, as you've seen, plants that you wanted to grow to uproot the intruder.
And I've seen that. I've had to fire some people, and there was no way around it. They had to be fired. But in doing that, I had other people leave out of protest because they thought I was being too harsh, and oftentimes those people later came back and acknowledged I was right in what I did, but it cost the organization. And so the earlier you get on that, the better. Two last things just to say is also don't let your plants spread. And that's kind of a funny one, but I've got these raspberry bushes that have been multiplying and growing, and they're delightful. My wife loves raspberries. But, every time I go out there, I'll find a raspberry plant that has started growing in my lawn. It's not in the bed, it's in the lawn, or it's over in the blackberry section, and they're spreading. And I like raspberries, but the other day I saw one that was growing in the middle of the grass, right where the rider mower comes through when it's mowing my lawn. And I thought to myself, that poor raspberry plant is going to get mowed to pieces and be done with. And so I transplanted it back into the the beds where it could be with all of its friends and cousins. But I know a lot of people are that way too. There are people that are constantly moving around, and they can really thrive when they're in this job. But they always have an eye for maybe management or for something that looks more sexy to them and what they might do. But they're not good at that. It's kind of the Peter principle. It's like you're really good here, but now you're getting moved and promoted to a spot where you're not effective. And I've had people that there's some I've worked with that were just quite ambitious. They just always wanted more. They wanted to get their hand in something else and be involved in that. And can I serve on that committee? And you began to realize they have left their area of fruitfulness and effectiveness. And I need to, as a leader, to grow this organization, I want to put everybody in places where they can thrive and where they can strengthen the organization. But some people just have that tendency to a roaming eye, and I've seen that, in one sense, even with professional athletes. You'll see like a hockey player, maybe he's a left winger, and he's got a center on his team that sets him up all the time, and he's scoring goals like crazy. Scores more goals than he ever had. And he has a coach that has a system that works perfectly for his skill set. Well, he scores a ton of goals, so he's a free agent, and he signs to go play for a different team because they pay him a little bit more money. But that other team has a whole different system, and they don't have a center that sets him up. But now he's getting paid a lot of money, so they really need him to really produce. But if he'd stayed where he was, he would have had somebody that just kept feeding him the puck, and he would have been scoring and setting all kinds of records.
Yeah.
But he sort of moved out beyond where he was effective to a place where he's not in. And you wonder, like, well, this is the same player. Like, did he just lose all of his skills in one season? No, he roamed over and out of an area where he was effective. And now he doesn't have the same setup for him. And so you got to watch your staff and keep them in the, certainly encourage them to grow and develop new skills and perhaps go up the ladder some. But keep an eye when they've moved out of the area of their effectiveness. And then lastly, just kind of a summary is just enjoy the harvest. It is about the harvest. The reason you grow things is not just to grow them, but because there's more fruit, there's more, you accomplish your mission. And I know a lot of leaders that are busily running around from meeting to meeting, phone call to phone call, but at the end of the day, there's never a harvest. It's like you seem busy all the time, but like, where's the results? Where's the salad? And it's always ultimately about the harvest. It's always about the fruit at the end of the day. Yeah. And I know gardeners, you can compost and you can read all kinds of books and do research on seeds and climates, but at the end of the day, show me your garden. Show me all the vegetables that are growing and developing and maturing. But for some people, there's a lot of activity and no harvest at the end of the day. And that's what it's all about, is one day you're walking among these vegetable gardens and they're just loaded down with great edible vegetables that you grew yourself. And you think it's been worth all the effort. Look at this. And leadership, one day you want to walk around that organization, see those effective, happy staff, employees, or joyful, fruitful, growing church and say, wow, leading is fun. And it's like gardening. You garden because it's fun. And when you're seeing things grow and develop and be fruitful, it's fun to lead. And my prayer is that whether you're raising kids in your home, whether you're leading a church, whether you lead a business, I pray that you're having a blast gardening that what God has put into your care, and you're seeing it be fruitful and multiply.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. If this is something you enjoyed, it really makes a difference if you leave a review and a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends. We always love hearing from our listeners, so email us at podcast@blackaby.org.